Hello, this is Paul Lennon. Good evening. It's evening here in Guatemala this time I'm talking to you, and this would be tape number 8 uh, of me reading, commenting on my autobiography, Our Father Maciel, who art in bed, a naive and sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. And just a while ago, I saw a very nice former legionary friend of mine, companion of mine, suggesting that I should be telling this story in Spanish. I should have written my memoir in Spanish too, and he is right. It's been an omission, and pido disculpa a mis amigos de habla hispana que no está el libro en español y que yo no les estoy hablando en español. I'm sorry to say that my book is not in Spanish and I'm not speaking in Spanish at the moment. Um, but maybe some miracle will happen. And here we are. Anyway, going through next chapter here, and I'll do my best to keep it snappy, to keep moving along, because this is looking like hard work. It's hard work for me doing this, so it must be hard work for you trying to listen to me and look at me all over again. I don't have any fancy gadgets here going on, and music in the background, but maybe we'll get there. Anyway, chapter 6 is always begins with the or letter. So retreating from the world. And I began this time not with Siddhartha. I began with a quote from Gerald Manley Hopkins in I think a poem which we probably learned when I was back in Ireland. Excuse me, for the intercert or something like that. It's called "On Taking the Veil." Very brief. It's like I'm taking the vows. I have desired to go where no springs fail, to fields where flies no sharp and sided hail, and a few lilies blow. And I have asked to be where no storms come, where the green swell is in the heavens dumb, and out of the swing of the sea. My very poor recitation of this beautiful poem. My reaction is, boy, maybe I have desired to go where springs not fail, to fields where fly no sharp and sided hail, and a few lilies blow. I have asked to be where no storms come, where the green swell is in the havens dumb, and out of the swell of the sea. And there was a lot going on in Salamanca. It was not really this place of refuge and this place of haven and this place of solace. It was au contraire, my dear friend. Okay, so one of these things, this chapter basically is my path towards ordination. So it kind of moves a little bit faster, hopefully, and less rest of the training and getting ordained a priest. Yes, I did read Gerald Manley Hopkins' verse, but it was wishful thinking. My spiritual life continued to be plagued by doubt and drought, and by legion formation, is what they call training. Soon after starting my novitiate, the assistant novice master, Father Jorge Cortes, then recently ordained, told me not to sign my letters to my mother with just my first name, Paul. Instead, I should write Brother Paul Lennon, NLC, meaning Brother Paul Lennon, novice of the Legion of Christ. Separation from the family. Adios, amigos. Adios, familia. All incoming and outgoing mail, even to relatives, had to be monitored and reviewed. The Legion was our new home, our new family, replacing carnal bonds with spiritual. Now, I omitted in that last chapter, chapter 5, there's elements in that chapter which hopefully the thoughtful reader, looker, uh, visitor will see the elements there of what the Americans call very clearly snitching. The Americans could not understand how this system was implanted in the Legion. To them, it was like something, it was a horror. They could hardly contemplate that we in the system lived by a system of snitching, telling on each other. Anyway, now we're into whatever, separation from family, distancing, cutting the bonds, cutting the umbilical cord. In our conversations, strolling in threes around the gardens, we novices never spoke of our families, our siblings, or our previous life and experiences, our likes and dislikes, our opinions, uh, our wishes, desires, or difficulties with those who lived with us on a daily basis. Criticism or complaints of any kind related to our superiors or our legion life were strictly taboo. Doubts and problems were a sign of weakness, and we should never share among ourselves because it might scandalize another brother and make him lose his vocation. Don't let me going on this thing about losing the vocation, please, because some people think the vocation is like a holy medal or something you have in your pocket, and if you jump around too much, it might fall out of your pocket, and then you lose your vocation, your calling to the priesthood, your calling to serve God. And this infantile uh, image is very common among Catholics, at least, and probably among other Christians too, other Christian denominations. Like, be careful, take care of your vocation. Yes, evidently you have to take care of it, you have to nurture it, but it's not like something that it's not like an object you have hanging around your neck or in your pocket, and you might, when you change your pants, you might throw it out and get washed or something. This is quite ridiculous. It's a deep inner emotional conviction or a feeling, an intuition, a calling, a religious sentiment, the grace of God calling you to something different than mainstream society, we might say, than the path of for the Catholic priest is than the path of marriage. We novices spoke only to other novices in our community and to our superiors. We could not speak with the humanities students or they with us. Gregarious, curious, or talkative members would be given a penance for breaking the rule of communication or incommunication. Novices and juniors, as they were called in Spanish, that's why I sometimes make a mistake, the humanities students, could not speak with any of the philosophy or theology students living under the same roof. We were permitted to send letters reviewed by the superior to individual members on other legion fronts. We could cross the barriers there, but only in our um, epistolar communication. The phone was off limits. There was no internet at the time. Novices did not read the papers or watch television, always viewed in group anyway, in the media room, save on very special occasions such as papal elections, other Vatican events, or special treats like World Cup soccer and carefully edited movies where, the person in charge would cover the screen with his hand when any erotic or scenes appeared. So he screened our eyes from those uh, unchaste thoughts and images. The only information we had about the other fronts, as they were called, the other legion houses, was what the superiors told us, or what was contained in carefully edited official magazines exchanged between the fronts, and what we could glean from the occasional circular letter from Nuestro Padre Maciel. We had no idea what was going on outside our own community of novices. We did not even know there was what was going on outside. Under no circumstances could confidences be exchanged between members, as this could lead to familiarity, which in turn could lead to intimacy, which in turn could lead to a particular friendship, which in turn could pose a threat to the vow of chastity. I was heterosexual, so not like I was going to fall in love with another brother, but I'm sure Father Maciel counts in that possibility. And we've heard of many cases of that happening in different parts of the world, notably the USA of America, where there were lots of homosexual relationships, etc., etc. But Maciel himself was a kind of a homosexual pedophile, so he didn't want any other people doing what he did. I'm cruel, aren't I? But it's true. Um, So you got this long syllogism that I just made out to you. This complex syllogism, citing a passage in Latin from one of the early church fathers, perhaps Saint Augustine, sounded like gibberish to my innocent mind, but I wanted to be a good legionary. Father Arami explained how personal difficulties should be entrusted only to the legitimate superior. So when you notice the brother acting strange or then suddenly disappearing, you passed no remark. It was always the case of brothers disappearing in the night or in the early morning. They would disappear from the community. No explanation was given. There was no goodbyes, nothing. So when you notice a brother acting strange, if you saw a brother having a nervous breakdown, in one case I witnessed him burning the large drapes outside the chapel's glass windows, you did not ask questions and were given no explanations. Could be traumatic to some people, for goodness sake. I witnessed this. Brother had a nervous breakdown. He was a very gentle, sensitive soul, and that Salamanca was a killer for him. I hope he recovered. If the brother were playing soccer with the day before, did not appear for breakfast the next morning, you kept mum. If the superiors noticed some anxiety swelling in the ranks, sticking out like a sore thumb, they might mention something vague in the weekly advice sessions to contain any possible damage. With the greatest charity, they put our minds to rest about the brothers who disappeared during the night, despicably selling out his legion vocation for a bowl of lentils, or sadly giving in to the pull of sensuality, softness, selfishness, or because of lack of generosity with Jesus. This is real cultic. This is People don't realize, and this is cult-like behavior. If something is wrong, you're to blame, not the system, not the superiors. If something happens, if something is bad, you're to blame yourself. Okay. Who wants to be there? We were hooked. We were hooked. Enganchados. One of those terrible hooks we couldn't get off. Or very often there was a nice one. Brother had to leave because of illness. Se enfermó el hermano. Giving some concessions now to my Spanish speaking friends. Or the euphemistic, he was granted special permission by nuestro padre to leave. Now, what again is really galling is that I've heard in many cases I've heard of both of legionaries and also of the senoritas, the young lady, the consecrated young women who belong to the Regnum Christi. And all of a sudden, the superior, for them, their spiritual director. Now, what in God's name, spiritual director is just another young woman supposedly trained by the legionaries. And she is their spiritual director. Please let me out of here, you know. But the spiritual director, probably who is almost like the superior, it's the same thing, would come along and sit down with them one day and very gently break the bad news to them. Uh, Brother Anthony, I'm sorry to say, the superiors have been looking at your record and we have consulted Mr. Padre Maciel, and it appears to us that in the presence of God, you do not have a calling. You do not have a vocation. So it is better for you to leave now. Get married, meet a nice girl, get married and have children. Now, please, Heavenly Father, our Lord Jesus, have mercy on us and give me the patience to cope with this spiritual abuse. Some of these people hadn't the slightest idea what a calling was, and here they are sitting in judgment. You have a vocation, you don't have a vocation. Will you give me a break? This is crazy. Do the bishops know about this? I mean, does the Vatican know about this? Hopefully, somebody in the Vatican might read this or might see this or something. And there are a few good men there, notably one Charles Scicluna. Vatican prosecutor in cases of abuse of minors. He is one of the few that gets the message. And the other cardinal, uh, Assis, in charge of religious orders and apostolic groups, whatever, he seems to be getting some inkling of what a sect is in the Catholic Church. And he made a statement a few years ago saying that the Vatican was investigating 70 sect-like groups in the Catholic Church. So wake up, please. Legion's peculiarity is very, very hard to understand what the Legion really is. And Catholics, again, forgive me, I sometimes say, and I don't want to hurt sensitivities, but we Catholics sometimes are the most ignorant of Christians. Because Catholic doctrine is so complicated, and priests haven't been able to break it down to the people. We need to. Here I am. I'm an ex-priest. I'm teaching priests how to be priests, how to preach. Why were we ever excluded as former priests from preaching the word of God? Well, that was one of the punishments they gave us when we asked to be dispensed, to be freed from our public ministry. Thou may not preach ever again for the rest of your life. And I think some of us would do a better job than some of the chaps that get up there in the pulpit, because we have to keep making it intelligible to the people in the pews. And one of these is that we have to keep summarizing what we have, what the Christian doctrine is all about, and get to the essentials and stop talking about all the branches and leaves of this humongous tree of doctrine, which is the Roman Catholic Church. Anyway, so now I'm going to explain to people, and it's 60 minutes gone, what the Legion is. Okay. The Legion of Christ is a Roman Catholic religious congregation. By congregation here, we do not mean a group of believers, the terminology in other Christian denominations. So the little congregation prayed for guidance from above, as the song used to say, but the congregation. But this is called a religious congregation. This community of believers in Catholic parlance is called, the usual community by Catholics is called, in Catholic official terminology, that's the faithful or the parishioners. In precise Catholic terminology, congregation is what people commonly call an order, except that orders per se are older and more venerable institutions than the more modern congregations. Orders date back to medieval and Renaissance times, suggesting names such as Benedictines, Franciscans, Jesuits, what else? Augustinians, for example. Nowadays, female and male congregations abound by the hundreds in the Roman Catholic Church. Members of orders and congregations are under the direct authority of their superior, to whom they pledge allegiance. So they're not directly under the oversight of the bishop, even though they are to some degree if they're working in a diocese. But congregations often kind of don't have to necessarily work in a diocese. They work through their houses. And that's how the Legion and other groups like the Opus Dei, etc., that's how they infiltrate the whole church. And they can infiltrate parishes sometimes without the bishops knowing. There have been cases in the United States where at least 7 bishops have put a stop to the legionaries working in their diocese, because they said that the legionaries never asked for permission and they were infiltrating the diocese, unbeknownst to the bishops. So much for fidelity and loyalty to the bishops. Words, words, words. The Vatican tries to hobble this unwieldy assortment of groups under the authority of a kind of government department in Rome. Dicastery, it's called Dicastery, department of the Roman Curia, called Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life, that's us, and for Societies of Apostolic Life. So there are all these consecrated men and women in the church who are not strictly speaking either nuns or brothers. One of the technical distinctions between the two types of institutions is that the members of orders profess solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, whereas the members of congregation take simple vows. The solemn vows are more difficult to quit by dispensation. And just to complicate things, Catholic diocesan priests, most of the ones you see in parishes who are under a bishop's authority, who do not belong to an order or a congregation, and do not profess the three vows, are nevertheless bound by the solemn vow of celibacy, which can only be dispensed by the Holy See. So regular diocesan priests, they don't have the vow of poverty. So they might have they can have a nice card if they want one. So no criticizing your priest's fancy car. And they only have to obey the bishop. And he very often doesn't get very involved in their lives, whereas the religious or the order priests always have the superior. They have one superior in the house where they live. The Legion's nature and structure is not monastic and does not have a cloister like the orders of Poor Clares or Franciscans. Legionaries live in houses, and Regnum Christi members live in houses, usually in nice neighborhoods, from which they can go out and in which lay people may enter. Neither is the Legion a contemplative order like the Cistercians or the Trappists, in which members spend most of their time praying and performing manual labors. This comes, I think, for Saint Benedict, ora et labora, work and pray. The case would be of Thomas Merton, who many Americans and the world over are familiar with, who went into a monastery, Cistercian monastery in Gethsemane in Kentucky State, US of A. The Legion describes itself as a congregation of active life, members spending a fair amount of time on active duty, going about their daily activities outside the mother house. It is not easy for a Catholic to grasp all these distinctions, just as it is for the American, indeed for any 20th century youth to understand the Legion's high degree of information control. Here lies the paradox. The Legion, founded in 1941, and thus to all intents and purposes a modern congregation, isolates its members from the outside world more than many other monastic and contemplative orders. No phone use, no access to the internet, no viewing of TV or listening to the radio. Now, of course, they're going to say legionaries now have, what is it called? They have email. But according to my knowledge, their emails can be inspected and censored. In other words, there would be control. If you have a brother Father Paul Lennon, and he has his email, and he has LC after his name, that is part of a network, of course, that can be monitored by the Legion superiors. So, as we say, freedom is relative. As a legionary, I at least never turned on the television, never surfed the web, or bought a newspaper or magazine at the corner stand. I could not step outside the house without my superior's permission. The rules did not allow me just to pick up the phone and call another legionary in another house. Much less could I call my family or friends. What friends? I lost them all, except one, I think. Bless his soul, and I've lost him too recently. Isn't that very sad? Oh, yes. I do not have, I had to have a motive, an objective to contact outsiders, extraños. All activities not sanctioned by the very detailed rule had to be approved by the superior. They were literally hundreds of rules, some greatly detailed. My house superior monitored all my actions. I tried to act like a good novice, later a good religious, and I obeyed all these rules. Because of this isolation, I never heard of Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and I can tell you the Beatles, okay? I was never interested in the Beatles because I never really heard about them. And it's my personal confession, confidencia. I still cannot understand the celebrity cult of John Lennon and the reactions I get every time I use my credit card. This happens a lot in the United States. Look at my credit card. It says John P. Lennon. John Lennon! Are you a relation? Are you? And I always say yes. I'm his cousin, uh, but I sing better than him. And the Americans, good, gullible Americans will say, really? hmm Yep, okay. So I had no knowledge of the Cultural Revolution happening in Europe, 1968, whatever it was, and in the USA in the 60s and 70s, no knowledge of Woodstock or the civil rights movement, no knowledge or experience of pot, smoke but don't inhale, or of the sexual revolution. Oh my goodness, did somebody say sex? Okay, we were babes in the woods or in the desert. My personal Caesar, of course. Remember when St. Paul was caught by the Jewish authorities or by the local authorities, he would always say, I'm a Roman citizen. I appeal to Caesar. And I could always appeal to Father Maciel, who was the ultimate authority. He came to visit us during our purgatory in Salamanca. I remember meeting him in the corridor and him asking me, he was, the chatty kind of thing. He asked me how the garbanzos and alubias were doing. How are you settling into the food here? The chickpeas and the kidney beans, how they were agreeing with me. This was the depth of our conversation. As a novice, I experienced this brief individual exchange with the founder as a privilege. I cannot recall any other individual interaction with Mr. Padre from that time except one. I must have sent home a photograph of me receiving my holy patron saint from Father Maciel at the traditional distribution of saints, a little ceremony we had after Christmas. And this is what I put on the cover of my book. Sorry, I have a notice here when my friend was, sorry about that, I was reviewing the book. Excuse me. We're getting into a tangle here with the sticker. Oh, the sticker can stay. Anyway, here we are. Okay. And then inside, I'm going to show you some pictures here because this is getting very boring. I'm glad I mentioned snitching. We got here anything? Maybe nothing here. Oh, when my parents went to visit me in Rome. You see this? Jackie and Chrissy with brother Paul. This was in September 1966, so 5 years later. That was the first time I saw my parents. I saw them after 5 years. I was more fortunate than Declan Murphy. It took him 12. But I was in Rome and I was on the fast track to get ordained, as I've said before, so that we Irish could conquer the United States for Christ. Thy kingdom come was our motto. Anyway, here we are. This is a fountain in St. Peter's Square. Isn't that beautiful? Lovely. Mommy and Daddy in the sun. Here's me with my cappello. This was the official kind of Roman thing, was this unwieldy hat that we had to wear, sitting at my dad in St. Peter's, I think, too. But I'm sure they must have treasured these things. My son, a priest, as Mummy would say. What else do I have here before we get into this? Oh, on my way to the priesthood. I think this is becoming called an acolyte. Right? Excuse me. Little Paul, getting it from the cardinal or something like the bishop, whoever he was. Confalonieri, maybe Cardinal Confalonieri. Won't get into any more now. We're hitting the 29 minutes punch here, so I promised to get out of here as soon as I could. As I say, as co-founders, we had the privilege of sending to and receiving correspondence from Father Maciel as often as we liked, without inspection by anyone else. He was not only our superior general, but also our spiritual director, da lontano, as the Italians would say, from a distance, presented to us as a holy man with great wisdom and skill in directing souls. Fortunately, I was never gullible or superstitious enough to believe he could read my mind or soul, or as some other legionaries did. This was the myth behind Father Maciel, and I still have Alejandro Espinosa, my wonderful friend in Mexico, saying he could look into your eyes and see your soul. I say, sorry, balderdash. Balderdash. He maybe convinced the young boys that was true. I would never believe that. Thank goodness I was not that silly. It was commended that all legionaries write to our founder on a regular basis, totally opening our souls to him as we would to God. Thus we could have spiritual direction by mail with our superior general and founder. What a privilege. I began to practice soon afterwards, writing to him at least once a month in Spanish and receiving occasional replies, a total of about a dozen in 23 years, dozen letters in 23 years, which I considered a personal confidential, and it was my treasure. I would keep them in a special folder, and you're not allowed to take them out of the Legion when you left. I hope I didn't breach any rules by doing so. They might sue me. Oh my goodness. These were one of my treasures. You could keep them once you were a legionary, together with the crucifix of your religious profession. So when they sent you from one place to the other, you just had a clothes on your back, basically, and your religious the crucifix of your religious profession, and the letters from Father Maciel. It was a sign of being a devoted legionary to have received letters from the founder. I'm not sure what happened to my collection of Mr. Padre's letters when I left the Legion many years later. Were they taken from my room? Other ex-legionaries report that theirs were taken from their room. Mr. Padre Superior General was also the supreme authority over every legionary in case of a misunderstanding with our immediate superiors, or when we needed privileges or exceptions to the rule, we could appeal to his judgment and impression and intercession. Just like a Roman citizen could, I could appeal to my personal Caesar. Hasta la vista, and we have to continue with this darn sixth sixth chapter, retreating from the world and towards ordination. So sorry for taking so long. Bear with me. As I say, this is getting to look like hard work. If it is for me, it has to be for you. So appreciate those volunteers and those very brave and constant people who are looking at these videos. Thank you very much. And I really care about everybody. I care about all those who are in and all those who have left and all their families and friends and even people who never even properly joined and have been touched by the Legion in some way. Ciao.